Hello everyone and welcome to this simple, fun little sketching video. Today we are showing that anything can be interesting, and this is a scene from St Neots. It's from the sort of, let's call it the industrial quarter. It's the building of Bosch Rexroth, which is fine. It's a big industrial building on a sort of busy road, but it's not a natural kind of thing you'd expect to paint. It's not something you'd expect to find, for example, on a greeting card or a Christmas card, is it? And yet we can make it interesting using our loose ink and watercolour skills. So I'm starting off with my little fine liner here, 0.3mm fine liner on some cold pressed watercolour paper, and I'm finding shapes. That is all I'm doing. Going around this rather interesting, slightly oddly shaped building. Lots of curves and things, lots and lots of windows, and I'm finding simple shapes, breaking it down into big rectangles, small rectangles, circles, ellipses. Around the building there's quite a lot of greenery, so I'm still breaking that down into shapes, but those shapes have got a lot of texture, and that texture and that looping helps pull apart man-made shapes versus those looser, flowing, angular, geometric, interesting, leafy shapes. By doing that, by flowing around the image, we can basically pick out the whole scene bit by bit, but keeping it really simple. For example, look, these flagpoles don't need to be anything more than a stick with an angled square on it. So I just put the square at the top, each flag at a slightly different angle. And notice how I'm leaving lots of bits out. So I've left out loads of windows. That doesn't mean they're not coming in later, but it means I've left it flexible for what I sort of want to do versus need to do. And I can see as it evolves whether to add bits in there or here. And it means if I only have 15 minutes, I get better at simplifying it, purposely leaving things out. Here I'm finding the darkest bit. So finding your contrast, your light and your dark is a really key part to making ink and watercolour interesting. The fact we have ink lets us hatch like I'm hatching here. And that hatching immediately gives you the darkest dark, darker than any of your watercolours. And that contrast, that light, that dark, is what makes things visually very interesting. And can also provide a lot of detail about shape. So notice how these windows, they look 3D, they look sunken in, because we use that contrast to show the shape, show the shadows, show what is actually going on in this image. Again, we can just keep moving around, adding little bits here and there, sort of correcting bits where we notice they're wrong. We can only correct if we're gentle at the start. One thing I sort of noticed, and you've probably noticed as well, I'm sure, is that the perspective here isn't quite right. Now, my excuse, if I need an excuse, is that I stupidly had the reference on my computer as I was sketching this, rather than in front of me, and that meant I was looking off to the side, and it's a learning point over and over again. And maybe it's good that I make these mistakes because it means that other people with a better sort of patience than me can learn and avoid them. Basically, if something is off to the side, it's really hard to see the angles, so you just tend to miss them. So you need your reference or your scene to be clear in front of you. Anyway, enough of the ink waffle, on to the watercolours. Here we have a big, basically bland building, don't we? So I'm starting on that building to make it interesting and dropping in some punchy colours with loads of water, Indian red, bit of quinacridone sienna, and letting them flow, letting them move. Then finding other interesting places of colour, these lovely greens, a little bit of cobalt green, and letting things blend together. It might blend too much, but because we're painting wet, we're painting loose, we can do this. We can come back and it can be taken away. And if we take away too much, we can even come back and later put on a little bit more back. So we end up exactly where we want to be, but loose and with that watercolour magic. This is a great thing to try out in the sky as well. So here, look, we have lots of water splashed randomly around, and now we come in with some indigo and cobalt blue. We see what happens and we move it around. More water, push it around here, push it around there. Maybe do some splashes, maybe drag it over the building. Again, the building's not got exciting colours, but in our version it can. And we can do that by being loose and just letting the watercolours blend, mingle and do their thing as we gradually work with them. Don't instruct them what to do, but work with them and respond to what they seem to want to do. Or tell them off a little bit if they, go too far. Again, just doing little touches like this, touching in indigo, touching in bright colours. It's only possible with watercolours, and we want to, well, for me, I always want to play into that. Play into the fact that some of these things you can only do with watercolours. Watercolours are magic. They are different and they have just unique effects. So painting with loads of water, touching colours, letting them move, letting them blend, especially in the first layer of colour, the loose colours, I think is absolutely vital and takes so much of the pressure off your sketching. Even though this is still the first layer of colour, we can start to build up interesting, slightly higher value areas. For example, dropping in these richer pigments to create little blooms, or finding specific shadows amongst the white, the negative space, or deeper soft shadows. So they're going to be soft because the page is still wet. So dropping in these dark areas will allow them to flow. Also, we can invent lines. So these lines of ink already on this roof are invented to try and give it a bit more structure and show the true shape. And we can do the same with our watercolour, adding in invented lines to give it structure and a bit more shape. Of course, a few splashes, something I love doing towards the end of my process, to just see what happens, to fill in that space. When you've recognised there's a lot of blank space, a lot of open space, often a great answer to that, great answer to filling that space but not overdoing it, are some splashes of the colours you've been using. And now we let it dry, and as if by magic, we come back and look how it magically softens and it becomes lovely and gentle. I'm now going to change to this, a flat brush. With a flat brush, we hold less water, more pigment, or at least more pigment compared to the amount of water. And so we can suddenly start applying these painterly, drier feeling marks. Now, if we do this through the whole sketch, what you'll end up is with a very busy, overworked feeling sketch. If you do this on top of lovely loose colours, what you end up with is a painterly feel, the feel where you can see those brush marks, you can see how this painting was constructed, you can see the sort of vision of whoever painted it. So hopefully you can see what I'm seeing in the colours, which may not really be there, but they're what I feel, represents the scene, what represents the shadow the best. Particularly in areas like the greenery, it's quite a fun way of creating shape and creating a bit of light and dark. I always love drawing in road marks, whether they're there or not. I think it's a nice way to frame the scene. And again, you can tell often I'm getting towards the end of my colours when I start splashing. And then we can come back, and with all these bold colours comes a need to restructure a little bit. And I'm restructuring today with a Fude pen so I can get these really nice big bold marks in. Now notice when you make these bold marks how things come forward. A risk with really bold marks is that we cartoonise things, we make it really illustrative. So we need to be a little bit careful, unless that's the style you're going for, and that's no bad thing. Cartooning is a brilliant form of art. But if you're not aiming for that style, if you're aiming for something closer to a sketch, an illustration, even fine art, then you need to be really careful about not overdoing the bold marks. Now I'm going much bolder than normal here because I think the character of the watercolours can take it. They're quite bold. We've got all these painterly marks, so we need something bold to sit on top of that and get our structure back. I'm also very happy to play into the geometric feel here, using lots of square lines to describe our loose kind of greenery to get that feel. It's still very different to the smooth lines of the big warehouse building, but the square lines produce a kind of different dynamic. They make it, for me, more interesting, and they play into the character of those square painterly marks. We can also decide what's going to be a real feature, and here, just by outlining our flag poles and our flags with dark lines, even though the flags themselves are white, they become a feature. And the flags don't have to stay white. They can, or we can decide later to add a bit of colour. But by bringing them forward with that black pen with those bold marks, we give ourselves the option. Again, I notice at this point, I'm just like, I've made a bit of an error with the perspective. It's not the end of the world, but I put a little bit of effort into slightly nudging it around, getting it a bit more realistic. And then we move on, we just do our final touches. And for me, the final touches today aren't too many. So I just think the thing I'm missing is, like I said, a little bit of colour in those flags. And like that, with those little dots done, I consider this little sketch done, and hopefully you agree that even though it's not that exciting a building, you can make anything interesting. Just go out there, have a bit of fun. If you enjoy this kind of style, subscribe to my channel. I make boring things, hopefully interesting all the time, and I will see you in the next video. So thank you everyone for watching my little sketching videos. If you enjoy my content, please do subscribe to my channel because it makes me really, really happy. Thanks again.